What's up, you guys? All right, so I'm sitting here in the driver's seat of a 1969 Boss 429 Mustang. I'm gonna give it a cold start, and I'm gonna talk a little bit about why this car is so special, and I'm gonna take it for a drive. So you guys are in for a treat. Now, this is the same car that John Wick drove in the first movie. His was dark green. Although I'll say that I'm not sure his was actually a Boss 429. The hood was not original to the car. Had the hood pins, smaller scoop. Steering wheel wasn't original, so I don't, and the interior wasn't quite right either. But in any case, it was a 69 fastback, probably a Mach 1. And this right here is the real deal. 1969 Boss 429, one of 857, I believe, produced for 69. So let's hear this kit and purr. Now, there are some specific instructions on starting it, which I'll talk about a little bit later. But right now, let's just hear what it sounds like. A little slow to turn over. It has a manual choke, and I don't have it. I'm not using the choke right now. And now down to the idle. Man, that sounds awesome. All right, let's take it for a spin. You know, this is a pretty expensive car. It feels wrong to, maybe throw up a little bit of gravel, maybe get some paint chips. But on the other hand, it feels so right. Yeah, it feels right. So before we go too far into driving the 1969 Boss 429, I want to talk a little bit about what makes this car so special. The Boss 429 was built by Ford in order to fulfill the requirement to allow the 429 engine to compete in NASCAR. And this was an engine and a car built to compete with the 426 Hemi engine built by Chrysler. So the 429 engine and the Boss 429 built in 1969 is a very limited edition car. There were 859 total Boss 429 engines released in 1969, and of those, 857 went into a Mustang. This one that we're driving today was the 117th car produced. Now, these cars were built by Ford and then sent to Carcraft that was in Dearborn, Michigan. And so each Boss 429 has both the Ford VIN number on it and a Carcraft number, a Carcraft stamp on it, which is the number in the series of 429s that they produced. So what Carcraft did was they actually had to modify the engine bay of the Mustang they received from Ford in order to accommodate the 429 engine because it was so large. The first 279 429s that came out of Carcraft came with the S-Code engine. The S-Code engine, also known as 820S, this was the engine designed for NASCAR or for drag racing. The S-Code engine, also known as the 820S, featured almost no smog or emissions equipment. And that makes it more desirable because as that equipment was added to the T and the A-Code engines, their total horsepower decreased. So the S-Code engines were designed for NASCAR or for drag race use. They featured magnesium valve covers, hydraulic cam, heavyweight rods, and as I said, almost no smog or emissions equipment. So these are the first 279 produced by Carcraft with Ford, and this is the 117th that came off the factory line. Both the 820S and 820T engines in 1969 had no engine rev limiter. In 1970, the 429s did have an engine rev limiter. These also featured a very distinctive large hood scoop that was the same color as the car, and it was a hood scoop that the driver was able to control. And so what that scoop did when you closed it, it would route air from around the engine through the carburetor, and when you opened it, it would let that cold, fresh air come in to breathe through the carburetor. The 429 S-Code engine features a single Holley carburetor, but it's a 4-barrel carb, and it goes through an aluminum intake and then the hydraulic lifter camshaft. The engine also features a driver-controlled choke, and so in cold weather, the driver of the car could use the choke to make it easier to start. And so with the combination of being able to use the choke and use the controlled ram air to either have warm air near the engine or the cold fresh air, it gives the driver a pretty good amount of ability to change the way the engine runs, although that can also make it a little bit more difficult to drive and to get it running really smoothly. This 1969 Boss 429 was owned for a period of time by a fellow in Nebraska who did rebuild the engine. It is engine matching to the vehicle. While the cars were rated conservatively at 375 horsepower and 450 pound-feet of torque, the actual output tested over the years has been well over 500, with this one coming in at 570 horsepower. Despite high horsepower and high torque ratings, the 429 engine performs really well at higher RPMs and has been said to be able to run at 9,000 RPM for extended periods of time, which, given it's a 7-liter engine, is very impressive. The engine is mated to Ford's 4-speed shifter. It's not the Hurst 4-speed shifter that a lot of folks like in their Fords. It, in my opinion, is not the easiest transmission to use. I think the transmission on the car that I have needs to have a little bit of work done on it. But even if it was in perfect working order, it, to me, feels a little bit more difficult to use than other cars that I've driven. But it is a very close ratio 4-speed transmission. And so when I shift from first down to second, I can tell the RPMs come really, I mean, they drop. Whatever speed you're going in first, you go to second, the RPMs drop. But they don't drop way down because the ratio is close. So really, it just feels like it wants to keep ripping. It wants you to keep your foot on the gas, going from first into second, into third, into fourth, and let that thing rev, and it can rev up to 8,000 RPM. In order for Ford to use the 429 engine in NASCAR, they needed a minimum of 500 Boss 429 engines to be built and sold to the public. That was the production requirement. And this type of production requirement with racing is very common, not just in the US, but also in Europe, and was a minimum requirement for Porsche with the 1973 911 RS, also with several other Porsches that were specifically used for racing. So oftentimes it is the car and the engine in very limited quantities that were made just to meet the minimum production requirement that have become the most collectible and the most valuable. Right now, Hagerty lists the number one grade A collector value of this car at $352,000. The last two sales of a Boss 429 were listed at $335,000 and $324,000. And there was one, I believe, that just sold for closer to $400,000 within the last month that actually isn't on this list by Hagerty. The value of the Boss 429 hit its peak in around 2014 when pristine grade A with low miles, completely original, obviously engine number matching, but also with very, very little modification. Original paint and everything were selling for over $500,000. In fact, there was at least one that sold for over $700,000 at auction. What's up, you guys? All right, so we're on the road, and you're gonna hear this car. I'm gonna talk through it a little bit. I'm gonna talk about kind of my 2 cents on it, my experience driving it, and I'm also gonna let you just listen to this engine. It's incredible. It's unlike anything else that I've driven, that I own. It may not be the fastest car off the line, it may not have the highest top speed, but this is a piece of history. So 1969 Boss 429 Mustang. In first gear right now. Down to second. Up to third. And now I'll just leave it in third for a second. I would say my favorite sound is just the idle. Just idling. Because it's just got this deep, just gurgling. It sounds amazing. Now, some of the other cars that I have sound really good too, but in different ways. This one, it's something really pretty special. The first thing that I noticed when I first sat in it, a couple things. Number one, again, it's a piece of history, and so it's not to critique it, it's more just to comment on observations. The driving position is a little low, and you've got a huge hood scoop right there. It's manually controlled, so right now it's open, so it's letting fresh air in. But right down below, there's a little knob with the A on it, and I can pull that out, and when I pull it out, it'll close the ram air. And so when you're doing a cold start and the weather's cold, you may want to close it. If you're driving in the rain, you may also want to close it. I hope no one drives a 1969 Boss 429 in the rain, but again, if you did, you'd want to close it. So the driving position is kind of low. It's, the seat is low. I can't see the end of the hood really, and I've got this big hood scoop right in my way. So that creates a little bit of a not perfect driving position. The pedal placement is good, but I don't think I'd be able to really easily do a heel toe downshift because the position of the brake pedal is high up and the gas pedal's sort of much lower, so I can't, it's like, I don't know, maybe if I was barefoot I could move my foot into the right position, but not with my shoes on. So not really positioned for like an aggressive kind of heel toe shift the way you could with the Porsche. But the brakes are tight. One thing that's kind of interesting with the gear shift is that and so now we're back down to just a nice idle, and this just sounds so good. So the gear shift, it always goes to the lean against the far right there, so straight up is third and straight down is fourth, which is kind of odd because I've always had gear shifts that rest in the middle. Now, this is the only 429 that I've driven, so I can't say for sure that this isn't just a feature of this car. It was restored and it sat in a museum in, I think it was South Dakota, for almost 20 years before I bought it. So, I don't know, but in any case, so you go over and then up to first, down to second. The transmission is a little finicky. It kind of feels like if you pictured like a stick in a bowl of like oatmeal that sat out for like 4 or 5 hours. That's kind of what this feels like. It's like, am I in first? Is that there? I guess so. Getting into reverse is kind of the same way. So it's not, I don't know, it's not as easy to shift. It's not hard, but it's not as easy as some of the other cars I have. It does have a radio and everything else like that. It has lap belts. The gauges are really set back. They're far away from me as the driver, and they're really set back, so they're a little bit kind of hard to see in there compared to the Corvette, where like the 63 to 67 Corvette, the gauges are right there, very easy to see. But again, who cares about, you just go by the sound of the engine. Now, again, I'm not street racing here, but, let's just see what this kid can do. Golly, she's got a lot of kick, a lot of power. Boy, she's mean. She really sounds mean. So that was the 0 to 60. I mean, I would say that was probably, if I was going to estimate, probably like, I mean, what's like a really good McLaren? Like 3 seconds? I would say I probably did it in like a half second. I mean, maybe a quarter second. It was basically like 0 to 60 quarter second, I would say. So I'm going to drop down to third. Give it a little gas. And these are the days that this car loves. It's a sunny day. It's not too hot. It's warm. But it's not too hot. It's like, I don't know, 75, 80. The temperature says it's running on the cool side, which kind of find hard to believe, but that could be accurate. So this, again, has a little bit of trouble going from third to second, from third down to second, so I skip and go from third to first. Hums and rattles and things like that. You know, it's a car from 1969. It's put together well. It has actually, it really doesn't have much wear on it at all. But, you know, again, without going through every individual panel and every piece of, you know, plastic and everything else, it's going to have a couple rattles here and there. That's to be expected. That's okay. Still in fourth, and at this point it's just kind of like, you know, I would say a great car for cruising on the county roads. You know, the roads from before they put the freeway in. So, you know, around here we've got Route 7 going up and down the whole western side of Massachusetts. You can take it down to Connecticut, up to Vermont. It's a great road for this car. You go through some small towns, you know, meander in and out, and you get to hear the rumble and the idle. So I'm going to drop down here, down to the third, and I've got a speed bump here. It's not a super low nose, so no scratching. The only problem is I'm rolling, and I don't think I'll be able to go from neutral to second without coming from first to second. So this, at some point, I have a mechanic who's really, really good on these old cars, and what I'll probably have him do is work on the transmission. He had mentioned that there's some little plates, and he was kind of like, it's amazing for what a huge engine that, you know, it all comes down inside the transmission to these small little plates, and he said it's not uncommon for them to crack, and when they do, it can be hard to get in and out of gear, and it can shudder a little bit when you're pulling the clutch out, and those are some things that I do notice about this car, which make it a little difficult to drive. You know, you kind of don't have second gear, and sometimes you don't have first, and sometimes you don't have reverse, but you definitely have third and fourth, which is good, but, you know, be nice if I... So right there I went into second, but from a stop. Alright, so back to first. Now, here's that just there reminded me of something else. So when I was first driving this car, when I first had it, I called my mechanic and I said, listen, you know, I'm frustrated. I can't get it started. I try to start it and it's, you know, I hear it, it's got gas, I hear it sparking, but it's not, it just dies out. And then, you know, I can't figure this out. And he's like, all right, he's like, I don't want to offend you right now. He looked at the car, he's like, there's nothing mechanically wrong with the car. The problem is you. Sir, you don't know how to drive the car. And so like right now, pulling the clutch out of first, I need more gas. Now in another car, you could get away pulling the clutch out without using a lot of gas. But in this car, you can stall it out. And then once you're stalled out, it's a little hard to get started again. From a cold start, it's very easy to flood the engine. You've got to know how to use the choke. You've got to know how to use the ram air. got to keep the ram air closed, you've got to pull the choke, and you've got to pump the pedal a couple times, and when it starts to roll over, you got to keep the idle high enough so the engine doesn't die. And, you know, in my work with trading stocks and day trading, it resonated to me because sometimes, you know, I've had issues, or I've had students who have had issues with something like a order not working properly, and they're like, man, this thing's broken. You know, the trading software's broken, or, you know, whatever it is. And it's like, well, maybe, but oftentimes it's user error. And this is a car that, you know, it takes a little bit of time to really learn how to drive. Another guy with a Mustang there. So we got a couple old cars. All right, so I've got about 1/4 of a tank of gas, which this thing is gonna eat gas, but it's okay. So I'm going right now about 35. This is a little confusing because the number size on the odometer and on the tach are identical. So, am I going 25 miles or is that 2,500 RPM? And that was in third gear. I didn't bring my radar detector. I got to keep it under 50. It's 55 miles an hour. That's my top speed. So, yeah, when you try to start this, if it's in a garage, I would assume most people would keep this type of car in a garage. I do. So, in the garage, during the winter when I was trying to start it, you know, because you want to start a car every now and then, make sure it turns over, everything else. The problem I was having was, you know, I'd pump the gas pedal a couple times, I'd try it, wouldn't fire, have to try it again, you know, whatever, take a couple tries. By the time I finally got it going, I've got to really keep my foot on the gas to make sure it doesn't stall out. Next thing I know, I got the smoke detectors going off, and the garage is filled with smoke. That's 55. That's barely speeding. Now, as you can imagine, this is a rear-wheel drive car. So you've got a heavy engine in the front. You've got rear-wheel drive. You're going to have. It's going to be hard to get the rear wheels to swing out on you, unless you get onto something kind of wet, gravelly, and so that's what I'm looking for right now. Some gravel. It's pretty dry, so I'm not going to find anything wet. Well, folks, looks like we just found a gravel road. I mean, in some ways it feels like, you know, this is a pretty expensive car. It feels wrong to, you know, maybe throw up a little bit of gravel, maybe get some paint chips. But on the other hand, it feels so right. Yeah, it feels right. All right, you guys, well, I hope you've really enjoyed this episode of Tire Kickers, a cruise in the 1969 Boss 429 Mustang. It's a timepiece, it's a time capsule, it's an amazing car to drive. I feel lucky to be able to drive it. It sounds so good. It's really incredible. But if I could only have one classic car, one collectible car, would this be it? No, it wouldn't be. The fact is, this is a car that's a little hard to drive, and it's so valuable that it's not a car that you want to put a lot of miles on. You want to kind of drive it as little as possible in a way. So it's you know, it's nice for a Sunday drive with you guys. I'm glad to make the video with you. It would be fine for a nice drive with Keanu. That is an open invitation, Keanu. Come on over, take a spin in a real Boss 429, because I know that car you drove in the movie, that didn't look like a real Boss 429. But if you're fortunate enough to be able to have a couple, then you know, this is one to add to the collection. They're hard to find, they're worth a lot, but for good reason. All right, so stay tuned, guys, for the next episode of Tire Kickers, and make sure you leave questions, comments down below, and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. What's up, everyone? All right, well, if you made it to the end of this video, you must also be a tire kicker just like me. So hit that subscribe button and come over to tirekickers.com to check out some articles that I've written about some of my favorite cars, including that 23 window 1961 VW bus.